Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto learned Fuuinjutsu and build harem with Hinata, Hanabi, and Tenten Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Naruto, now in his last year at the academy, was sitting in a seat in Iruka-sensei's class in the middle of Hinata and Sasha. Naruto tried to listen to his sensei, he really did, but it was so boring. He had so much fun in the last summer that sitting in class was just too mind-numbingly boring. They were reviewing what they had learned last year and what they were going to cover this year, and Naruto could say with no doubt in his mind that it was going to be a boring year. It was the last year of the academy and they weren't going to cover any of the subjects that he liked. They weren't going to study Fuuinjutsu, elemental manipulation, or genjutsu. The only subject that he was going to enjoy this year was trap making, and even then there was probably little that he hadn't figured out through trial and error with his pranks. Now genjutsu, he could understand that there were classes on the subject that you could take after you graduated, he had heard from Tenten. Fuuinjutsu on the other hand was an incredibly useful art, and once you got just the basics down you could at the very least not need to buy a sealing scroll or explosive tags. Of course, Naruto thought a bit more on the subject. If they did, Naruto wouldn't be making as much money as he was making seals. The last one, elemental manipulation, only some of the clan kids knew about and some in no real detail. It can be a bit of a dangerous practice. Only those with a wind affinity were in any real danger of getting ahead of themselves and getting hurt practicing a jutsu that was beyond them. It was going to be a boring year, and Naruto knew that he was going to be getting some more time to study some of his favorite subjects. If he played his cards right and his luck held up, which it always did for some reason, he could be a high-class journeyman or a low-class seal master by the end of the school. It also gave Naruto time to work on his latest project. After school, Naruto and the girls went to their usual training ground and started to train. Yakumo was going to be training with them today. She had made some good strides in becoming a ninja. Her taijutsu had improved quite a bit, and her genjutsu on the other hand had improved in leaps and bounds. With the help of her bloodline she was able to make genjutsu so powerful that it caused the victim to believe anything that happens to the victim within the genjutsu physically harm their body. She had mostly fire-based genjutsu and the creation of monsters that can't be easily dispelled. She did this by making the monsters double or sometimes triple layer genjutsu, but she could only make 2 or 3 of the bigger ones of them at a time. It was a productive day of training with their little group. Hinata almost had the ball of water a meter out of the water, but the ball was unstable and would pop from time to time. Hinata was also working with Anko on learning the hubby fighting style when it became apparent to Hinata that the Hyuga style was too rigid for her body. The hubby style focused more on flexibility and solid strikes to vital areas. She was also looking at the Phantomu style, which was a purely defensive and evasion style. The Phantomu was one that Yakumo found and was practicing as it went great with genjutsu in her weaker than average body. Hanabi was also working on her element, but it was going slower for her as she could dry out the leaf, but she was having a problem grinding it to dust. Her taijutsu had improved quite a bit and she was the best in their group at taijutsu. The Hyuga style just fit her body. Hanabi wasn't as flexible as Hinata. Sometimes she wonders if her sister is double or triple jointed, but she did have some and she worked into the style when she could. Sasha worked on the kenjutsu style that the Uchiha used. It was a mix of a few styles and focuses on quick and accurate strikes through an opponent's defenses. She was making good progress with some pointers from Anko. She got the info from Yugao Azuki. Tenten wasn't there today, out on a few missions with her team, so that left Naruto and Yakumo to work together. They were doing mainly physical exercises, push-up, sit-ups, running, and sparring. They were sparring no. Naruto used a bastardized version of the strong fist. He used it in a loose stance where he was able to adapt to changes in the opponent's fighting, be it with taijutsu, ninjutsu, kenjutsu, and in the case of Yakumo, genjutsu. Yakumo's genjutsu was a bit different to others because she mainly used her fire and monster genjutsu, and with those she used multiple layers genjutsu. They can physically hurt Naruto and he isn't that good with genjutsu. With Yakumo, her genjutsu monsters can be physically fought, but if you don't break the jutsu they will just keep coming back. Naruto ran at Yakumo, who had one of her monsters in front of her. This one was about 4 feet tall and seemed to be covered in red-brown skin. It had no real head, what it had was more of a mound of flesh with a hole where the face would be. It had a thick body with hands that had 3-foot-long claws. The Mumbler from the Silent Hill game, and yes, most of Yakumo's monsters will be from Silent Hill. Yakumo's monster went to defend her with a thrust of its claws. Naruto dodged left and punched the monster, but it didn't move much and took another swipe at Naruto. As Naruto was fighting her monster, Yakumo finished another set of hand signs. On the ground all around her, foot-long bugs that looked like moth larvae came into being from what looked like ash collecting. The twinfeeler from Silent Hill, just smaller. There was about 10 of them and most of them went underground and the rest went at Naruto. Naruto, seeing the new monsters, knew he had to get rid of the one he was fighting. Now Naruto wasn't good at genjutsu, but there was one thing he knew that could kill these monsters. Dodging another swipe from the first monster, he put his hands together in a praying motion, concentrated his chakra into what he imagined to be a sphere and pulsed his chakra. Yakumo, knowing what Naruto was doing, had her monsters dodge, but the first one was not fast enough to get away and shattered like glass. The pulse was about 5 feet wide, and when it dissipated she had her larva spit at Naruto a purple liquid. Naruto charged Yakumo while dodging the liquid, but when he got loose 3 larvae popped out of the ground in front of him and latched onto his legs. Where the larvae were started to burn, and Naruto saw that the bugs were producing the same liquid that was being spit at him. He charged another pulse and shattered the bugs on his legs in a few globs of acid that were about to hit him. Yakumo was finishing another set of hand signs and she used one of her fire genjutsu, will-o-wisp. 5 balls of fire about a foot wide appeared that looked like they had an eye in the middle and started to shoot balls of fire that were about the size of soft balls. Naruto, seeing this, thought, I hate fighting long range. Dodging even more projectiles of fire and acid, he went through hand signs and called out wind style, blade bits. He swung his arms out and 24 wind blades the size of razors shot off. They went through a few fireballs but didn't do anything and just passed through them. Naruto wasn't aiming at them because he knew fighting genjutsu with ninjutsu was pointless. He was aiming at Yakumo. Yakumo, seeing the blades coming, weaved her way through them and only came out with a few shallow cuts. She ran to one of her wisps and held it in her hand. Naruto, seeing this, wondered what she was doing. She had never done that before. Yakumo concentrated on the wisp and it began to change. The fire began to wrap around her hand and forearm. When she was done, her hands and forearm were covered in orange fire. She opened her hands and there was an eye on each palm. She pointed her palm at Naruto and started to shoot fire at him herself. Naruto, seeing this, knew he had a bit of a problem. Yakumo's normal wisps had perfect aim, and with the speed at which they flew at someone they were a bit difficult to dodge. But their perfect aim and their independent thinking was their weakness. They shot where you are not where you are going to be. The wisps weren't smart. All they knew is shot the target, but if you were fast enough they would never hit you, just keep you on your toes. The difference is now is Yakumo can think and will aim where Naruto is going to be when he dodges the other fireballs and acid. Naruto knew that he had to get rid of the bugs and the wisps. So he went to the bugs first. They were small but they were slow. It only took Naruto a moment to get to the bugs and shatter them. He took out a few seals and said Fuuinjutsu style, Hado ten Kyukaku, sphere shells. Yes, I made this one up. The seals burned and 24 purple balls of energy appeared. They began to fire 2 or 3 at a time at Yakumo to keep her from taking too many shots at Naruto. By the time they had all fired, Naruto had taken down 2 of the wisps, but the other 2 were in Yakumo's hands. She didn't want to lose them like the others, and she had one more thing to try. Naruto and Yakumo stared at each other, and Naruto said, "Your genjutsu is getting better." Yakumo smiled and said, "Yes, they are. My bloodline helps out a lot, but it comes with some side effects." Naruto looked a little confused and said, "What side effects?" Yakumo smiled and said, "You are about to find out." With that said, she concentrated on the 2 remaining wisps and they began to flow up her arms. The fire became more defined than they were before. Before it was just fire going up her arms, but now they looked like armor. An arm guards on her forearms and an armored shoulder caps with plates of armor going down to the elbow, with an armored claw on her hands. Yakumo undid the braid in her hair, and that was when Naruto noticed another change. Her eyes were now a deep purple with what could only be described as insane glee in them. Yakumo looked at Naruto and smiled and said, "Are you going to play with me, Naruto-chan?" Naruto, now thoroughly confused at the near childlike voice she was speaking in, nodded, and that was all Yakumo needed. She charged at Naruto at a speed that he didn't know she had and tried to take off his head when a sword of fire formed where her hand was. Naruto ducked and hit her in the stomach, but all it did was knock her back when it should have done more than that. Naruto threw a pair of kunai at her with a chakra threading seal on them, making a net between them, and Naruto found out why the punch had little effect: genjutsu. Yakumo passed right through the net, still charging him, and at that moment another Yakumo appeared behind him with a hand raised ready to slash at his back. Naruto ran forward at the Yakumo in front of him, charging a chakra pulse. The Yakumo behind him took the back of his jacket, exposing the chain mail under it. The Yakumo in front of him made no attempt to dodge and fired a thin stream of fire at him. Naruto's chakra pulsed and passed through the Yakumo and nothing happened. He barely dodged the steam of fire and leapt back and looked at the 2 Yakumos in front of him, now more confused than ever. Both of the Yakumos smiled at his confusion, and one of the Yakumos said, "Confused Naruto-chan?" Naruto nodded as he took off his jacket. "You see, Naruto-chan, one of us is a genjutsu and one is not," the other Yakumo said. "I got that far, Yakumo, but I got the genjutsu you," Naruto said. They both smiled and said together, "Are you sure, Naruto-chan? And there is something you should know. My name isn't Yakumo, it's Alessa." At that they charged again. Naruto, still confused, took off at them. One of them grew their claws to 3 times their original size, and the other was shooting steams of fire at him. The clawed one got in close and took a few swipes at him, while the other covered any openings that the clawed one made. This went on for a few moments until Naruto got tired of it, and when the clawed one made slash up and Naruto ducked low and hit her with all his might, knocking her back to the other one. Naruto took out a flash seal, closed his eyes and set it off, and after he looked to see which Yakumo was blinded after the flash. Naruto took the chance and took out a shuriken with a wire on it and threw it at one as he charged another pulse while running at the second Yakumo. The second pulse worked and Naruto quickly ran at the other one before she could get free. After catching Yakumo, or was it Alessa, she struggled a little before giving up and said, "Well, Naruto-chan, what are going to be with me now? Are you going to have your way with me?" "Well, for one, no, I'm not going to have my way with you. And can you explain to me what the hell that was?" Naruto said, still confused. Yakumo smiled and said, "Well, Naruto-chan, my name is Alessa and I'm the other Yakumo." At Naruto's even more confused face she explained, "When someone from my clan uses our bloodline, we sometimes develop a second personality to help with the more complicated genjutsu. So when Yakumo started to focus only on genjutsu, I developed much quicker than normal. Not that I wasn't already on my way before, it would have just taken longer." "So this is the side effect she was taking about?" Naruto asked. Alessa nodded. "That's a weird effect." Alessa shrugged and said, "It may be weird, but hey, I'm not complaining." "How did you dodge my first pulse?" Naruto asked. "I got Sasashi's help and made a seal that is on my wrists." It's a chakra storage seal, and with it I was able to learn Kawarimi no Jutsu, and it was a piece of cake to change places with my genjutsu clone, Alessa said. Naruto was surprised and asked, "You can use jutsu now?" "No, Naruto-chan, I can't. Just using Kawarimi no Jutsu puts my body in pain, not that pain is a bad thing. My body isn't used to normal chakra," Alessa said. Naruto thought about that for a moment and nodded and asked, "What do you mean that pain isn't a bad thing?" Alessa smiled and said, "Pain is a normal part of life, the burning muscle of a hard day's workout, the pain after a good spar, and the pain of being spanked." Alessa's smile got bigger as she saw the blush that was now on Naruto as he tried to say something, but Alessa answered before it could be asked, "Yes, Naruto, me and Yakumo like being in pain. You should come over to our house and see the stuff we have hidden under the floor in our closet." Naruto tried to get his blush under control and said, "Maybe later." Alessa looked happy when he said that and let Naruto untie her. It was a productive day of training, even with the fact that when Yakumo got back in control she couldn't even look at Naruto, knowing the conversation that he and Alessa had. It didn't compare to the embarrassment that she felt when Naruto said that all she needed to do was ask after they were done training. A month into the new year at school for Naruto and the girls at the academy, and they were looking forward to their ninja careers. There was one more thing that Naruto wanted to do for the girls before they got into the ninja world. Naruto was done with his next seal, but he needed a little help putting it up. So one Friday after school Naruto got Hanabi and headed to an unused training field and got to work. Naruto needed a good hard surface to write on and a few other things for the seal to work. It took Hanabi a while, but she was able to get what Naruto needed done. At the end they had a good hard surface to write on with 12 pillars coming out of the ground. The pillars were about 6 feet tall and were in 2 circles, one smaller than the other. In the middle of it was a pedestal that was round and about 5 feet across. Naruto knew it was going to take a while to get this seal done, so he got to work. It took Naruto about a day and a half to get the seals all down on the ground and on the pillars, but when he was done it could be called a work of art. The seal consisted of 2 large circles that ran into all the pillars, with the pillars themselves having 3 lines of seals going up their sides. In the middle of the 2 seals there was a circle, and on the other side in the inner circle there was another circle. The most complicated part of the seal was in the middle, where the seal spiraled out from the pedestal. When it was done, Naruto spent the rest of the day checking the seal for any mistakes. Finding none, he reactivated the security seals he set up the night before. They made the place where the seal was nearly invisible, and he also set up a few trap seals just to be safe. With that done, he went home and went to bed. The next day Naruto met up with everyone, Sasha, Hinata, Hanabi, Yakumo, and Tenten, and he even got Anko and Hana to come with them. When Anko saw Naruto, she brought him to her bosom with a smile. Now Naruto liked where he was, but he needed to breathe. "Hi Anko-chan, how are you today?" Naruto said. Anko smiled and said, "Well, hello Naruto-kun. Now I have a question, Naruto-kun." Naruto said, "What? When are you going to practice some genjutsu with me?" Anko asked. Naruto blushed at that and said, "I think I need to practice a bit more before I practiced with you." I'll go easy on you," Anko said. Naruto tried to ignore Anko and said hi to Hana and the Hamaru brothers. Hana smiled and said hi. With the hellos out of the way, they went to the training ground so everyone could get a good look at the seal that Naruto made. But when they got there, they put on a pair of goggles and took a look at the seals. "Someone was messing with my seals," Naruto said. This surprised everyone because only the girls and Naruto knew they were working here, and Anko said, "Did they get in?" "No, but not for a lack of trying," Naruto said as he deactivated the invisibility, and they saw what he meant. There was a crater on the ground, but the odd part about this crater was in a half circle, like it had hit something. Naruto went up to the edge of the crater and taped on something. When he did, a dark blue dome came into view. They disabled the traps, but the barrier I set up was too much for them and they weren't about to break it. even with force, Naruto said, pointing at the crater. Hana asked Naruto, how good would they have to be able to break all your seals? Pretty good considering they couldn't see the seals because the invisibility seal is on the inside of the barrier and I only know of 2 ways to see the seals. The first is to have the goggles I made myself to see them, or the second is to have the Byakugan, Naruto said. Everyone looked at Hinata and Hanabi. Hanabi said, it wasn't us. We didn't tell anyone. Anko thought for a moment and said, well, it looks like you are having someone spy on you. Why would they want to spy on me? Naruto asked. Anko looked at Naruto and said, Naruto-kun, sealers of your level are rare and the seals you make can be very valuable to the right people. Naruto had to nod at that as he was making a few 100,000 a month to make seals. Naruto decided that he would put more advanced security on his house when he got home. They all went up to the seal that was written on the ground and Sasha said, wow, Naruto, this has got to be the biggest seal you have ever made. Naruto smiled with a bit of pride and said, yep, this is the biggest and I wanted to give you all a spirit of your own. Really? How do we know they will like being summoned? Hinata asked. I made the seal to pick a spirit depending on the chakra and to pick a spirit that is bored and open-minded, Naruto said. Cool, it's amazing what you can do with seals, Naruto-kun, Hanabi said. Yeah, I'm an Uzumaki, so it runs in my blood, I guess, Naruto said. What does being an Uzumaki have to do with being good at seals? Hinata asked as she came and hugged Naruto from behind. Well, the Uzumaki clan was a clan that specialized in seals. They were also known for a few other things like their massive reserves of chakra, the ability to heal nearly any wound that didn't kill them immediately, and their long lives, Naruto said. Long lives? Hinata asked. Yeah, even a citizen of the Uzumaki clan could live to well into their hundreds, Naruto said. Being a ninja only lengthened their lives, if they weren't killed in battle. It wasn't uncommon for an Uzumaki to live to see 200. That was why the Uzushiogakure village also has the name the Village of Longevity. So that's why you have the chakra and stamina to fight all 3 of us at the same time, Sasha said, referring to herself, Hinata, and Hanabi. Naruto nodded and said, now that that's out of the way, let me explain the seal. He explained that all you have to do is pump your chakra into the small outermost circle and the seal will do the rest. Hinata gave Naruto a kiss on the cheek and went to get a closer look at the seal. Sasha came up in front of him and said, Naruto-kun, can I get a kiss too? Naruto blushed and said, Sasha, we have been over this. Hinata is my girlfriend. That may not matter anymore if the Uzumaki clan has a bloodline, Sasha said. What do you mean? Naruto asked. Well, you are the last male of a clan with a bloodline, Naruto-kun. The council in their infinite wisdom may put you under the Clan Restoration Act, Sasha said with sarcasm evident in her voice at the end. What? Hinata asked now that the conversation had her full attention. Well, it means that Naruto may have to take more than one wife so that his clan will grow faster, Sasha said. The reason I know this is that I am the last female of a clan and have looked into it. Naruto, still reeling at the fact that he may have more than one wife, asked, what did you find out about yourself? Well, if my brother, the last Uchiha, wasn't here, I would probably be used as breeding stock for my clan, Sasha said. The council has probably already brought it up in one of their meetings. Anko snorted and said, oh, you're right about that, but the Hokage has put a stop to anyone trying to, as he put it, court you. Sasha, looking resigned at that, said, that's a nice way of putting it. What would happen if they did court you? Naruto said. I would probably have to have a child by the age of 16 and they would use me till I was no longer useful and throw me away, Sasha said. That's not right, Naruto said. No, it's not, but most of the council doesn't care about that. All they care about is getting my clan's money and power, Sasha said. That's one of the reasons Sakura is in our class. She is the daughter of the head of the Citizens' Council and has convinced her daughter that Sasuke is the best man in the world. Naruto thought about it for a moment and asked, does that mean that Ino is the same way? Shisasha laughed at that and said, no she doesn't. I'm pretty good at reading people and I think that Ino is only chasing Sasuke because Sakura is. What do you mean? Hanabi asked. Well, Ino and Sakura used to be best friend. They used to play together all the time, but after Sakura started to chase my brother, Ino couldn't stand getting less attention from her best friend and also started to chase my brother. When that happened, Sakura decided not to be friends with her anymore and they became rivals, Shisasha said. Everyone in the room thought about that for a moment and Shisasha continued, it probably wouldn't take much to get Ino to stop being a fangirl. Just a push in the right direction would get her on the path to being a real ninja. But that's something for another time. Well, now that that's out of the way, who wants to go first? Naruto asked. I'll go first, Anko said. Anko stepped into the seal on the ground and knelt in a small circle in between the two larger circles. She then started to channel chakra into the seal and everyone saw two spherical barriers go up. She then started to channel chakra into the seal and everyone saw two spherical barriers go up, one of the barriers on the outside most circle, and the other on the inside of the seal around the pedestal in the middle of the seal. On the pedestal nothing seemed to happen for a moment and then all the seals glowed and an orange light started to appear. Then all at once fire came out of the pedestal and a figure appeared. It looked to be a woman who seemed a little confused. She was obviously not human, however, as she was covered in fire and what looked like black coals covering her red-orange skin along with a pair of small black horns to complete the demonic look. The creature of fire saw Anko and asked, what am I doing here? Well, I summoned you here with the help of Naruto-chan over there, Anko said and pointed a thumb over her shoulder at Naruto. She continued, my name is Anko, what's yours? Kusaburo. Now, why would someone summon me? Kusaburo asked. It was more along the lines of a loosely guided summoning. Someone else could have been summoned, but the seal you're sitting in chose you, Anko said. Kusaburo looked down at the seal below the pedestal she was sitting on. How did he get an idea like this? He accidentally summoned a storm spirit a few months back and made a contract with it and thought it would be cool to get his friends some too. So what are you, by the way? Anko asked. I'm an Ifrit, a race known to be beings of fire and always looking for power. If you're looking to make a contract with me, that may be a bit difficult as I'm not a spirit like the last one that was summoned, I'm a being of flesh and blood. Kusaburo said, looking back at Anko. This got Anko to think for a moment and asked, well, what do you want to do? Naruto-chan made this seal to pick summons that were bored and open-minded. I may fall under those things, but I can never really stay in one place for a long time, Kusaburo replied. Anko looked at Kusaburo and asked, can you fight? Kusaburo nodded and Anko continued, well, if you're good you can come with me on my missions, but you may have to tone down the fire on stealth missions. Kusaburo took a few minutes to think on this one and said, that's all right with me, and as for toning it down, suddenly the fire began to recede from her form and her skin went from red to the color of polished brass. Her horns sank into her head and shoulder-length brown hair became visible without the flames obscuring the view. As the changes finished she gave a slight grin at Anko, how's this? Anko nodded before she touched the inner dome and walked up to Kusaburo. She held out her hand which Kusaburo took with a smile. The next one to go was Hanabi and hers was relatively simple as she summoned an earth spirit named Barakusuden and was easily able to make a contract. Hana went after her and got a wolf spirit named Tanomu. Shisasha went through the same process as the others and waited for her spirit to come. After a moment, and a flash of red light later, there was a fox in the pedestal just sitting on it lazily. It was a red fox with black ears, muzzle, paws, and the tip of its tail. It looked at the seals on the ground and the barrier around it and then at Shisasha and said in a smooth but diffident male voice, hello there little girl, how may I help you? Shisasha was a bit irritated at being called a little girl, but ignored it and replied, this seal was supposed to summon spirits, but from the feeling I'm getting from you, you aren't one. The fox gave a bit of a toothy grin and said, I could be considered a spirit as I am a kitsune and we are spirit beings. My name is Hikage, what can I call you little girl? If it will stop you from calling me little girl it's Shisasha, Shisasha said, and I guess this summon is a bust as I'm not making a contract with a demon. The kitsune seemed to perk up at the mention of a contract and said, now don't be so hasty here Shisasha, I think we can come to a deal. I'm not selling my soul to a demon, Shisasha shot back. Now whoever said anything about selling a soul? Hikage wheedled, there are many things that can be bargained with. Now Shisasha is curious and asked, like what? Hikage sat up a little straighter and said, well there are a few things like some of your life, information, or from what I can feel I could take a bit of power from you. Shisasha narrowed her eyes and replied guardedly, you aren't getting any of my life, as for the other two, what kind of information, and what do you mean by taking my power? Well that would be information like this seal I'm standing in, some memories of yours or other people, I don't care much, or some books that can be of some use to me. As for power, when I'm around you I will leech a bit of power from you and I will even answer a few of the questions you may have about me, my kind, or some other people or other beings you may have. That is if the price is right, Hikage answered. Shisasha thought about this for a moment and finally concluded, I will have to think about this. That's fine, if you come to me I will give you something that will make it easier to get in contact with me, Hikage said. Shisasha narrowed her eyes and said, how do I know you won't try to get me or try to get out when I drop the barrier? I'll give you this bit of information for free, when a demon gives his word he can't go back on it. I, Hikage, will only give you what you need to summon me and I will not try to escape, Hikage promised. Shisasha thought about what he had said for a moment and decided to take a leap of faith in believing him. She touched the barrier and walked up to Hikage and asked, what are you giving me? Hold out your hand, Hikage answered. Shisasha did so and he bit into her forearm, but quickly let go. Shisasha pulled her arm back immediately and shouted, what the hell? She looked at her arm and saw the bite and the blood coming out of it. Hikage gave a toothy grin and said, I did exactly what I said I would do. I didn't say I wouldn't hurt you. Now look at your arm. Shisasha looked from Hikage back to her arm and saw a mark starting to appear on it. There were 2 black rings around her forearm and on top of her forearm was a circle that was over the rings with Hikage's name on it. All you have to do to summon me is put a bit of blood and chakra into the circle. Shisasha looked back to Hikage and said, well we're done here, and with a hand seal and a flash of light he was gone back to where he came from. She went back to the others and Hinata and Hana looked at the bite. Hana wrapped it and said it would be fine. 9. Now it was Hinata's turn and she got into the seal and put her chakra into it, then there was a flash of white. When the light was gone no one was there on the pedestal, instead there was what looks like an egg, about the size of a chicken egg, just sitting there. The spirits that were there almost had a heart attack at what this young lady just summoned. Did she just summon what I think she did? Barakusuden asked Tanomu. Tanomu nodded his head and replied faintly, I think so. Naruto turned to the spirits and asked, what did she summon? Barakusuden looked at Naruto and said, I think Hinata-san just summoned an angel egg. Everyone looked surprised at this and Naruto asked, what's an angel egg? Tanomu answered, it's something that helps a goddess control their abilities and use some of their more complex spells. Hinata's beautiful and all but a goddess, Naruto half asked, half stated, letting the sentence linger. The 2 spirits nodded and Naruto went on and finally asked, what does this mean? It means that your friend there is innocent enough for an angel egg to pick her to bond with, Tanomu said. They all looked back at Hinata. On the inside of the barrier Hinata couldn't hear the people and spirits on the outside of the seal. Hinata saw the egg on the pedestal and turned on her Byakugan to see if there was anything else in the seal. She almost immediately turned it off because of the bright light coming from the egg. She blinked the spots from her eyes and thought about what to do. The moment that her Byakugan was on, she did see that the egg was the only thing in the seal. Hinata touched the inside barrier to dissolve it, and she went up to the egg and picked it up. She held it in her hand and felt that it was warm to the touch. She looked at it closer and felt it move a little and saw it start to crack. Then the egg burst open and a light flew into Hinata's chest. Almost immediately Hinata was on her hands and knees in pain and the barrier around the seal broke. Naruto was at her side in a moment and tried to see what just happened. What happened? Naruto asked Barakusuden and Tanomu when he couldn't find anything wrong. The angel is bonding with her. It will be a bit of a painful process, but it will pass when the egg settles in, Barakusuden answered. Naruto and everyone there looked back at Hinata and saw a bulge on her back, and Naruto ripped open the back of Hinata's shirt. They saw just above Hinata's bra skin going up in an unnatural way with the ball of light in the middle. Then there was a flash of light that everyone shielded their eyes from. Looking back at Hinata, they saw that she was no longer in pain, but was breathing a little heavy, but that wasn't what everyone was looking at. They were looking at what looked like a small person on Hinata's back. It was a girl that was the size of a small baby, but still looked like a full-grown woman. The little woman had long blonde hair and blue eyes, and for some reason only one white angel wing. The little woman looked at everyone with a smile and waved at them. She then saw that Hinata was in pain and looked a little sad and put a comforting hand on Hinata's shoulder. Naruto got a little closer and asked Hinata if she was okay. Hinata nodded and said, "Yes, give me a moment." "Okay, Hinata-chan, but just so you know, there is a little woman on your back," Naruto said. Hinata smiled at that and said, "Yes, I know, and I just got a lot of information at one time and I need a moment to sort it out. Her name is Cool Mint, by the way." After a moment, Hinata gathered herself up with a deep breath and looked at the small angel on her back. Cool Mint gave Hinata a smile when she saw that she was okay, and Hinata smiled back. Hinata got up and looked at everyone and gave everyone a smile to show that she was okay. Hanabi asked, "So what did you learn?" "A lot, and it will take me a while to sort through all the information, but I got the basics on angels and goddesses. I just can't believe that I summoned a real angel," Hinata said. Naruto smiled and said while hugging her, "Why not? You're my little angel, Hinata-chan." Hinata blushed and didn't say anything, just snuggled into Naruto's chest. After moving Hinata out of the circle, they continued with the summoning. Tenten went after Hinata and got a thunder spirit named Sudareki. Things got interesting again at Yakumo's summoning. She went through the summoning process and a black and red light came through. When the light died down, there was a young woman there, sitting on the pedestal. The young woman had light brown skin, a pair of DD, with shoulder-length white hair, and what looked like two small wings that were black near the top fading to red at the bottom. She had on a thin, dark red nightgown that was nearly see-through and left nothing to the imagination with knee-high dark red stockings. The woman looked at Yakumo, who was blushing at what the woman was wearing, and said with a smile, "Hello, my name is Sadesna, how may I help you today?" Yakumo answered, Well, Sadesna, me and my friends were summoning spirits to help us train, but I don't think you can help me in those clothes." Sadesna looked at her clothes and waved her hand, and suddenly she was wearing a red kimono before she said, "What would you want help with?" Yakumo lost her blush and said, "Well, I would like help with my genjutsu." Sadesna tilted her head and Yakumo explained, "The illusion arts." Sadesna smiled at that and said, "If it's illusions, then you came to the right succubus. The price isn't too high either." Yakumo thought that her being a succubus explained the nightgown she had on and asked, "What price and what can you do?" Sadesna answered, "Well, all succubuses can perform illusions, it's how we hide our appearance and feed if we don't want to sleep with our chosen meal. We perform illusions mainly two ways," as she said that a tail that until this point hadn't been seen showed itself. "We can use our tail," as she said that a spade at the end of her tail opened. "All we have to do is put this on any part of the body and we can make our meals have wet dreams." Or the more powerful succubi can do the same thing and much more by just looking at someone. As for the price, all I want is for you to gather some food for me. Yakumo frowned at that and asked how. Sadesna answered, I will teach you how to collect it through performing acts. She laughed at Yakumo doing an excellent impression of a tomato. Don't be so shy, honey. I can see the lust coming off of you right now. You can see lust? Yakumo asked, still embarrassed. Oh yes, I can see the emotions you are giving off in waves, Sadesna said. She could see that Yakumo lusted after and had quite a bit of affection for a person, and that wasn't all. She could also see that the teen had trust in this person bordering on obedience. Sadesna looked at the people outside the barrier that she was in and saw the boy, young man that had the girl's attention, and from what she could see he also had the attention of all the young women present. It wouldn't be too hard to teach you how to collect lust, and it will get you closer to that young man over there, Sadesna said, looking back at Yakumo. To Yakumo it was a tempting offer, but she had one more question for Sadesna and asked, if I say yes, can you teach me to see emotions and cast illusions with only a look? Of course I can. It will cost you extra, but it can be done, Sadesna answered. Yakumo nodded her head and said, you have a deal. Sadesna smiled little larger, showing perfect white teeth, and said, then come here, young lady. Yakumo dissolved the inner barrier and walked forward to the succubus. Sadesna put a hand on Yakumo's chin and tilted her head up, and when their eyes met, Yakumo felt a rush of information. Sadesna moved her head forward to catch the distracted Yakumo in a deep kiss. Yakumo came to her senses a few moments later and all but leapt away. Why did you do that? Yakumo all but shouted. Sadesna smiled and said, I was just getting you started. Yakumo was about to ask what she meant when it hit her. Her heart beat a little faster and she was getting a little hot. Sadesna continued, you can take care of that yourself and collect the lust off yourself, but you will get a lot more if you ask for a little help. With that said, Sadesna left with a giggle in a burst of red light. With that, the rest of the seal fell and everyone asked if she was all right, and she said that she was fine. With everyone having their own summon, they all left to get to know their new friend. The last two in the field were Naruto and Yakumo. Naruto was getting rid of the seal on the ground and Yakumo was having an inner debate with herself, but it was getting hard because she was still getting hotter and it was getting unbearable. It was just getting worse as she was so close to Naruto and she knew he could give her what she needed. It eventually became too much, and when Naruto was done dismantling the seal, Yakumo told Naruto what she needed and why. Not that she needed the why, Naruto would have been happy to help. I mean, what teen wouldn't? And he would be able to see what she hid in the floor in her closet. It turned into one of the greatest nights and morning of Yakumo's life. Ino was having one of the weirdest few weeks of her life. She had no reason for why, but she was now paying attention to Naruto and she saw that he was a lot closer to the girls than she thought. It wasn't anything big at first, just training and sparring together, but one day she followed Naruto after school and saw that it was more than that. Naruto would take the girls he hung out with on what looked like dates, and not just to Ichiraku Ramen. They would go there sometimes, but also to much fancier restaurants as well. Ino also found out that he even had more friends outside their class, people who were already ninja, and one of them she knew, Anko. Anko is not a woman that Ino thought any sane person would just hang out with. Ino first thought maybe Naruto was going out with all of them and that none of them had figured it out yet, and that was a story that Ino would love to spread. That idea was shot out of the sky when the next day Naruto went out with most of them after school shopping. It was Naruto with Sasasha, Hanabi, Hinata, a girl named Yakumo, and a girl named Tenten. To Ino it would have been a normal day of shopping, looking at shirts, shorts, pants, and other assorted things. Ino had tricked Choji and Shikamaru into taking her shopping more than once, and Ino was sure that Naruto was bored out of his mind, but he stuck with them and even paid for all the clothes that they got. That was another mystery. How in the world did Naruto have enough money to take 5 girls out shopping? They weren't just buying the cheap stuff after all. It was at the last stop that Ino finally figured it out, why Naruto had not gone insane with boredom. He was just waiting for the last shop on the trip, a store that Ino would never take Choji or Shikamaru to, a lingerie store. Ino was shocked when the store clerk not only gave him a pleasant greeting, but guided him and the rest of the group right into the changing area, and Naruto went where no other guys should go, the women's changing rooms. Ino walked up to the manager of the store and asked, "How come you let a guy into the women's changing rooms with no fuss?" The manager, an older woman that Ino was pretty sure was also the owner, answered, "Oh, that group come in here every once in a while. The first time I said that a young man shouldn't come back there, but the girls said it was fine. I still insisted that they may be fine with it, but the other customers wouldn't. Then one of the girls brought up the point that with all of them only one room was left open, so it was basically just them. I let it go then because they had a point." Ino looked back at the changing room and then to the manager and said, "Can I try something on?" The manager looked at Ino and asked if she was sure she was comfortable with the boy being in there. Ino nodded and went to the changing rooms. She did a quick henge and went in. The next 10 minutes will be forever burnt into her mind. The girls seemed to not notice her, and Naruto was far too distracted to take note of her. The girls were trying on all sorts of things from teddies to frilly bras to thongs. Ino might as well have been taking notes as they were in their own world. Shisasha seemed to like the darker colors and was never seen in anything but a thong. Hanabi was going for the skimpy look and wore as little as possible while still being somewhat dressed, and she also liked the see-through teddy. It was one of the ways that Hanabi had found that skimpy or flashy clothes really pissed off the elders in her clan. Hinata was more modest but was not one to be outdone, and because of her flexibility she had to be in a thong, anything else just got in the way. Yakumo seemed to like leather and Tenten seemed to like things with a string, which was why she was in a corset. What was Naruto doing in this personal strip-tease? He was just basking in it, giving a comment here and there. What shocked Ino was that they all let him touch. It wasn't anywhere too personal, just the girl's sides, stomach, and thighs. On top of that, the changing area seemed to be getting hotter, so Ino got out of there quickly. It took Ino a week to get up the nerve to follow Naruto again. Thank Kami they weren't shopping, they were just having some sparring matches. When watching those matches she noted something: they were holding back in class. They never moved that fast in class or gave any indication that they could use elemental chakra. It was a few hours before they stopped sparring, and Ino was glad because she had to get home soon. Ino thought that they all were going to go home, but only Hinata and Hanabi left while Naruto and Shisasha stayed in the clearing. "So Shisasha, the usual?" Naruto asked. No, let's go a bit further than that," Shisasha said with a smile. Naruto smiled back and said, "As you wish." He took out a scroll, and with a puff of smoke there was a mat with a futon on the ground. Ino was wondering what they were doing when Shisasha took off her top, leaving her in a black bra. Ino nearly fell out of the tree that she was in when the bra came off too. Ino looked to Naruto to see that he wasn't embarrassed in the least. When she looked back at Shisasha, she saw that she had taken her shoes off and was pulling down her pants. Ino was now seeing Shisasha basically in front of her. Shisasha had a solid B cup with dark pink nipples. Ino looked down Shisasha's body and didn't find a single flaw. Shisasha had a taut, perfectly sized butt and long legs. Every part of her had tone, muscle, and fat in all the right places. Naruto unzipped his jacket and took it off along with the chain mail he had on. Ino's mouth fell open at what she saw. Naruto didn't have an ounce of fat on his upper body. He also had defined arms and chest with the beginnings of a six-pack. Shisasha laid face down on the futon with only a black thong on. "You are always more open than Hinata or the others are," Naruto commented. "They always wear a bathing suit." "That's not that surprising," Shisasha said. "Hinata already has a C cup at 13 and is a bit embarrassed about it and how fast her body is developing." "Only a bit?" Naruto asked playfully while starting to give the massage. Okay, very embarrassed about it, which is why she always wears those coats to hide it in public, Sasha said. Hanabi on the other hand is holding back a little because her sister loves you and she doesn't want to get in the way. Naruto nodded and said, I figured, I mean Hanabi is at a small C cup and only a little bit behind Hinata. Less talk, more massage, Sasha said. Ino was in shell shock at the conversation that just took place. He does this with all the girls he hangs out with. Hinata has admitted her crush on Naruto to him. How far have they gone with each other? Ino was brought out of her thoughts when Sasha moaned as Naruto worked on her inner thigh. Ino watched as Naruto worked Sasha like an instrument. The noise Sasha was making would be music to any guy's ears. Naruto stopped and said, I'm done with this side, Sasha. Sasha turned over with a smile and Naruto worked from the bottom up. As Ino watched Naruto worked Sasha's body like a pro, and Ino could have sworn Naruto rubbed Sasha's thong covered. Naruto continued to work up her body, working her stomach, ran his hands on the sides of her, worked her arms and shoulders. Ino thought they were done when Naruto asked, May I continue? Sasha's smile grew as she nodded and Naruto started to knead her. Sasha started to moan as Naruto started to suck on her and pinching her other nipple. Naruto's other hand worked down her body and slid the thong down her legs. Ino at this point was starting to work her own body. Ino watched as Naruto spread Sasha's legs and stroked her. Sasha's moans got louder and Ino started to stroke herself through her panties while biting her lip to stop herself from moaning. Naruto worked his index and middle finger in and out of Sasha's as he kissed his way down her body. When he got to her, he removed his fingers and started to lick her. Sasha moaned louder and nearly came when Naruto started to nibble on her. Ino was watching all this in her tree, working herself furiously. She was at this point imagining taking Sasha's place. Ino was biting her lip so hard she nearly made it bleed. She was whimpering and letting out soft moans despite her best effort. Her attention was brought back to Sasha as she let out a mild scream. Naruto got out from between Sasha's leg, licking the juices off his hand and face, said, Well, that was fun. After catching her breath, Sasha said, Well, we could have more fun with our new friend. Naruto asked, Are you sure? We don't know her that well. I'm sure it's fine, Sasha said. She seemed to be enjoying herself. Naruto shrugged, took out a kunai with a thread on it and threw it into the tree. He pulled the string back to himself with Ino coming along. Sasha looked at Ino and asked teasingly, My, Ino, did you enjoy the show? Ino tried to deny that she was watching, but nothing came out. Naruto came over to her and picked up Ino's hand. Her fingers were covered in a clear liquid. Yes, Ino, I think you did, Naruto said with a smile. Ino looked away from him with a blush on her face and Naruto brought the hand to him and licked off the liquid slowly. Ino's face got redder with every lick. You don't taste bad, Ino, Naruto said. Would you like me to finish where you left off? Ino looked at Naruto in shock at the question and asked, How can you ask someone that? Naruto shrugged and said, The 5 people I've asked all said yes. 5 people? Ino asked, shocked. Yes, Ino, Naruto is good at what he does and always makes sure his partner is satisfied, Sasha said. But that's not right, Sasha. Are you okay with him having more than one girlfriend? Ino asked. Sasha giggled and answered, Naruto only has one girlfriend, the rest of us are just friends with benefits. If he wanted all of us as his girlfriends at the same time, none of us would have a problem with it. Naruto has enough stamina to go a few rounds with all of us at the same time and still be ready for more. There's no way he can do that, Ino said. You would be surprised at what I can do, Ino. I've got a lot of stamina and can recover very quickly. I could demonstrate if you want me to, Naruto said. How? Ino asked. Well, I could call Hinata and Hanabi back here and screw them and Sasha into the ground, Naruto said. All my girls love how I treat and pamper them. They would come back here without a second thought. How can you say that, Naruto? Ino asked. You're just using them. Ino, that's not the case at all, Sasha said, he only goes as far as we want him to. You heard him ask me if he could continue earlier, and if I said no he would have stopped. If you need more proof that Naruto isn't using us, look at his pants. Ino looked and blushed at seeing Naruto at full mast in his pants. Sasha continued, he hasn't asked me to satisfy him even after he satisfied me. If anything, Ino, we're using him to relieve stress and he asks for nothing in return, no matter how much he wants to, and that thing looks painful. But that's not right, Ino said. Ino, would you let me continue if I was a girl? Naruto asked. Ino looked at Naruto in confusion and said, maybe, but you aren't. Naruto put his hands into the ram seal and there was a puff of smoke. When the smoke cleared, Ino saw a female Naruto in all her glory. She had a B cup and pink nipples on her perky. Naruto smiled at the shocked look on Ino's face. That's just a henge, Ino said. Touch me, Ino, Naruto said. If it is a henge, then it will pop as soon as you do. Ino reached out her hand to what she believed was Naruto's male chest, instead grabbed a handful of Naruto's very female chest. Naruto let out a low moan and Ino nearly jumped out of her skin. That's not possible, Ino stated, eyes wide with shock. Naruto smiled and said, nothing's impossible if you work for it, Ino. This is a jutsu I made because I wanted to know what I would look like as a girl. According to what Hana found out about this jutsu, it suppresses all the male chromosomes in my body and turns me into a real girl. So you're really a girl right now, Ino said, and Naruto nodded. What else does it do? Well, what I've learned by being like this is that it brings out suppressed emotions to the front of my mind and I have less self-control. So when I'm like this, I need to get one of the girls to help satisfy me because, as you can imagine, I have a lot of suppressed lust, Naruto said. Like right now, my is soaked and the juices are running down my legs. Naruto put her hand on Ino's face, which made Ino blush harder. Naruto smiled and kissed her. Ino's eyes opened wide in shock at the femme Naruto kissing her. Naruto licked Ino's lips silently, asking her to open up, and Ino just went into autopilot. When Naruto pulled back, he looked at Ino, who had a glazed over look on her face from the deep kiss, and asked, Ino, are you? Ino got a shy look on her face and nodded her head. Well, thank you for your honesty, Naruto said. Most girls, even if they were, wouldn't admit it. May I continue? And keep in mind, if you say no, I'm just going to play with Sasha in front of you. A blushing Ino thought for a moment, if she stays like this, I won't lose my virginity, and he will satisfy me. Hi. Naruto smiled and kissed Ino again while unbuttoning her shirt. Naruto started to suck on Ino's neck as he needed Ino's throw her bra. Ino had a solid a cup from what Naruto could feel. Naruto took off Ino's shirt and bra before he began to cut off the bindings around her stomach with a kunai. Naruto rubbed Ino's sides and felt nothing but skin and bone. Ino, you should eat more, you're nothing but skin and bone. What? I don't want to get fat, Ino said. Well, Ino, that's the great thing about us kunoichi, Sasha said. If we train, all the fat goes to the right places and you also gain more muscle than fat. As she said that, she moved behind Ino and started to rub her sides. Women are supposed to have 11% body fat at minimum to be healthy. I don't want to get too muscular either, Ino said. Do I look muscular, Ino? Sasha asked. Ino shook her head no, and Sasha continued, if you don't try to get too muscular you won't, you'll just be toned like I am. Ino said that she would think about it, and with that Naruto started to suck Ino's and nip it a little. Ino gave a whimpered moan in response. Sasha lifted Ino's skirt and started to rub her through her wrappings and panties. Ino moaned louder and was getting wetter by the moment. It didn't take long before Ino moaned loudly as she came. My, Ino, I think you may have just ruined your panties, Sasha said as she held up her hand to Ino's face and continued, could you clean this up for me, Ino? Ino, still in her orgasmic high, began to lick and suck her juices off Sasha's fingers. When Ino came down off her high, she couldn't blush harder at what she was doing. Did you enjoy that, Ino? Naruto asked. Ino nodded, still embarrassed about finding out what she tasted like. Well, Ino, we're just getting started. An hour later, they were all laying on the futon Naruto had laid out earlier. It was a little small, but Ino and Shisasha were nearly lying on top of Naruto, so it was fine. Ino's mind was just coming back into focus, and Shisasha had a very satisfied look on her face. Well, Ino, I hope that you think about training and come find us if you need some help or just need to get out some stress, Naruto said. Sure, Naruto-kun, but I'm tired, so just lay where you are, Ino said as she snuggled into Naruto's right. Naruto giggled and ran his hand through her long hair, the ponytail undone a while ago, and along her back. Well, this is nice and all, but I think we should get dressed before some random ninja runs through the training ground, Shisasha said. She got up and stretched while grabbing her clothes. Ino stretched a little and said, I guess you're right, my dad is probably wondering where I am. Naruto got up from under Ino and gave her a kiss on the head. He put his underwear and pants back on, and with a puff of smoke he was male again, and they all finished getting dressed and headed home. When Ino got home, she saw her father in the living room relaxing after a council meeting. He looked up and hesitated a moment before he asked, What happened to your bindings, honey? He gave a slight nod to her bared stomach to show his meaning, reminding her that they had been cut off by Naruto earlier. I was training with some friends and they got ripped up, so I took them off, Ino said. Who? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Shisasha Uchiha and Naruto Uzumaki, and they pointed something out to me during training. Dad, don't I eat enough? Ino asked. Her father was surprised at this and said, Well, if you were to train more, you would need to eat more of a balanced diet to help you recover faster and build muscle. Well, I'm going to train more because Shisasha wore me out today without breaking a sweat, Ino said. Can you help me? He smiles at his daughter taking her training a bit more seriously and said, I'd love to. With the help of her father, Ino was able to gain a few pounds over the next few months and started to train with everyone. While training with everyone, she got to meet Anko a bit more often and started to learn from her. Ino took to learning the hubby fighting style and a few other things from Anko. Like poisons, antidotes, genjutsu, and, since Ino was a Yamanaka, some interrogation. That last one gave Ino a good look at the darker side of being a ninja. She also found out that she had the same elemental affinity as Naruto, wind. When Ino found this out, she was surprised. Most of her clan had water and earth affinities. So she also started to work on the control exercises for wind, but that was going as fast as expected. Ino was a bit discouraged when she found out how far ahead the others were. They could probably take out a Chunin one-on-one and all of them could give Anko a workout. So after Ino got the gravity seal, she started to work with the group more to try to catch up. The rest of the group got a better grasp of their elements. They hadn't mastered their elements, but they had control that most Chunin would be proud of. Naruto and Shisasha even started to work with a second element, water for Naruto and wind for Shisasha. Hinata, with the help of her angel Cool Mint, was starting to learn the celestial tongue, but that was extremely difficult. Just saying a few words would exhaust a person. Her angel said it would get easier with time and once Hinata learned her true name. Another thing that she learned to do was to see the soul of a person. In the beginning it was just the size of someone's soul, but as she worked at it she was able to see different characteristics. Like if a person was good or bad, and with a bit of concentration she was able to tell if that person is lying or not. It also worked as a sensory ability outside of the Byakugan, as she could see a soul much further than her Byakugan with no waste of chakra. Yakumo, over the next few months, was able to, work with Naruto in collecting lust to start learning from her new friend Sadesna. The first thing they worked on was casting genjutsu with just a touch. She was getting that easy enough, but if she wanted to learn to cast with just a look she would have to collect a lot more lust. Hanabi worked with her spirit and was able to modify a few earth jutsu. Like making the stone gauntlets from 3 inches of stone covering her hands and forearms to about half an inch with the same amount of stone. She was also able to use stone skin with just one hand seal. Tenten was working with her spirit and was able to magnetize some of her weapons, and she was working on controlling them in the air. She was also continuing to work with Naruto on her genjutsu. The academy was the same as ever and Naruto couldn't be more bored if he tried. At least it was a free period right now, or Naruto may have had to do something drastic. Like the time that Naruto was able to put a water balloon launcher on the ceiling and launch balloons filled with paint at Iruka. Or the time that he was able to get a pair of cat ear and tail on Mizuki that matched his hair color and wouldn't come off till the end of the day. Naruto looked around at what the girls were doing. Ino was reading a sealing book that Naruto had given her, just the basics. Sasha was playing the violin. Iruka didn't mind her playing, as every ninja needs a hobby. Hanabi was just thinking to herself and Hinata was reviewing the class work. "This is so boring," Naruto said. Sasha smiled and put down her violin that she was playing and said, "If they were teaching seals or genjutsu you would be interested in class." Naruto grinned at that and said, "I could teach those classes." Hanabi rolled her eyes. "You probably could, but there is no need to stroke your ego." "Why don't they? Fuuinjutsu, I mean, I don't think they would teach anyone genjutsu before you graduate," Ino said, as she read the book in her hand. "I don't know, how about we ask Iruka?" Naruto said as he raised his hand. "Yes, Naruto," Iruka said. "Why don't we study seals in the academy?" Naruto asked. "Well, the council took it out of the curriculum about 10 years ago. Said the art was too difficult for students to learn," Iruka said. Ino looked up and said, "Really? I have a book for beginners and the basics are simple enough. As long as you know the basics you could make your own sealing scrolls and explosive tags." "That may be, Ino, but the council has a say in what we teach in the academy," Iruka said. "Which council? The citizens or the ninja council?" Sasha said. "Both," Iruka said. "Why does the citizens council have any say in the academy?" Naruto asked. "I'm friends with older ninja and the standards back when they were in the academy were higher. They were, but the citizens council has gotten more power over the last 10 or 15 years, Iruka said. "Who are the ninja you have talked to?" "Enko Mitarashi and Hana Inuzuka," Naruto said. "You know my sister?" Kiba asked, surprised. "Yeah, she's a great sparring partner and the Harmaru brothers seem to like me too," Naruto said. "Who are the Harmaru brothers?" Sakura asked. "My sister's partners like Akamaru and me, but she has 3 partners," Kiba said. "Back on to what we were talking about, why the academy doesn't teach at least the basics of all the ninja arts?" Naruto asked. "Other than seal we do teach the other arts, Naruto," Iruka said. "Not really, Iruka-sensei, you don't teach how to make or counter poisons, what elemental chakra is, medical ninjutsu, and I bet not even half of the students in this class even know what genjutsu is," Sasha said. Iruka blushes at the last one and said, "I don't think that last one is a subject that I can teach in the academy, Sasha. I'll give you that one, but the other ones could be taught," Sasha said. "What is genjutsu?" Sakura asked. "Genjutsu is the art of seduction. Naruto, do you have a scroll on it on you?" Sasha asked, looking to Naruto. Most of the students were surprised at what genjutsu was and were now looking at Naruto wondering why Sasha would ask him for a scroll on seduction. "Let me look," Naruto said as he took out a scroll, and with a poof there were 10 scrolls on his desk. He looked through them and picked up one and tossed it to Sasha. "That is a scroll on the basics," Naruto said. Sakura furrowed her brow and asked, "Naruto, were all these scrolls on genjutsu?" "Yeah," Naruto said. "Why do you have them?" Sakura said. "I stumbled onto the subject by accident and found it interesting. So I read up on it in my free time," Naruto said. "Wait, do you practice that subject?" Kiba asked. Naruto gave Kiba a grin and said, "Like I said, Hana makes a great sparring partner. What? You seduce my sister? Kiba all but screamed. Naruto rolled his eyes and said, no, I'm still getting to know the female body, but I can give a killer massage. Kiba settled down a little at that and said, you better not. Or what, Kiba? You'll stop me? Naruto said, Hana's a big girl and can make her own decisions. Kiba growled at Naruto and Hanabi said, that and you love the way she looks in a thong. Kiba pounded on his desk and said, what have you done with my sister? Naruto rolled his eyes again and said, calm down, Kiba. To give a good massage you have to work with bare skin. I always ask if she is okay with something before I start. Kiba still growled at him. Getting back on topic, Sasha said, Iruka could give a few lessons on poisons, what elemental chakra is, medical ninjutsu. Iruka sighed and said, I will run it by the council and if they give me the go-ahead I will. So go back to studying quietly. The class listened and went back to looking at their books or whatever they were doing with the exception of Kiba and Naruto. Kiba was still glaring at Naruto and Naruto was happy that they may have some more interesting classes soon. It was Sunday morning in the training ground and as the sun began to rise, two people walked onto the training ground. The first one was Naruto, but he had a change of clothes. He had on a dark blue sleeveless shirt with a dark orange X on it that goes from shoulders to hips and it had the Uzumaki swirl on the back of it. He also had dark blue pants and a dark orange strip on the side. The biggest change was that he had on a pair of blue gauntlets on his hands that nearly went up to his elbow. The other person that came into the training ground was Sasha. She had on her normal clothes on. A black shirt and pants with red trim and the Uchiha emblem on the right side of her chest. The new things were the pair of black gloves she was wearing and the sword she had at her side. The sword had no guard and the handle and sheath were made of a dark red wood. Sasha took a deep breath and said, got to love the morning air. Naruto smiled and said, yeah, but we aren't here for the morning air. Sasha's smile was a bit like that of a predator seeing its prey and said, it has been a while since we could go all out, hasn't it? Hinata would never try to hurt me. Tenten is a long-range fighter, she is getting better with her sword, and I can blow all her weapons out of the air. Hanabi is a good taijutsu fighter and is getting better at earth style and Yakumo is good if I want to practice breaking genjutsu. You on the other hand have all of those, made not at the same level as they do, and you're the one that can give me the best challenge. Naruto said. Sasha's smile got bigger and said, you sure know how to flatter a girl. Naruto got into a loose stance and said, it's one of the perks of studying genjutsu. You don't stick your foot in your mouth as often. Sasha got into the Uchiha fighting stance and said, you still put your foot in your mouth every so often, but that is some of the charm about you, Naruto-kun. They quieted down after that and started to do something that they learned from Anko. They started to produce killer intent. Not a lot, mind you, but for someone in the academy they were doing great, and a moment later Naruto took off. He started with a punch to the head, but Sasha dodged at the last moment. She went for a kidney punch only for Naruto to knock her hand out of the way and went for a left hook. Sasha backed up a bit to dodge and unsheathed her sword. It was an interesting sword in the fact that it was pure black and seemed to absorb light. Sasha got into her genjutsu stance and got ready to strike. She didn't have to wait long as Naruto came at her. He came at her with a stabbing motion with his gauntlet's inch-long claws and Sasha thrust forward and dodged right at the same time. Naruto dodged right too, and used his gauntlets in a slashing motion. Sasha at that moment had her blade on the left side of Naruto's neck and tried to take his head off with a slash. Naruto jumped back and smiled a bit, I can always count on you to not pull any punches, Sasha. What would be the point of that? In a spar I want to be pushed to my limit and try to go further, Sasha said. She then stuck her sword into the ground and did some quick hand seals and took a deep breath. Sasha then picked up her sword and said, fire style, fireball jutsu, as she blew a fireball at her sword. The fire was immediately sucked into the sword that now glowed a dark orange. She then swung the sword at open air and an arc of fire came out. Naruto got out of the way of the arc and moved in close, doing a few hand seals and said, "Wind style, wind blade." He flattened his hand and a near-transparent blade came from Naruto's four fingers about 2 feet long. Naruto used his new sword to parry Sasasha's sword in a shower of sparks. Naruto was sure to not lock blades with Sasasha for more than a moment or she would use it to her advantage. Naruto and Sasasha are about even in their genjutsu skill, but there were a few differences. Naruto had the advantage in strength, but Sasasha had more flexibility. Naruto had a small edge in speed, but Sasasha had better reflexes. She did have her Sharingan. In a few minutes Naruto's wind sword was running out of power because every time the swords touched Sasasha's took a little chunk of Naruto's with it. Naruto knew his sword wouldn't last much longer so put all his strength into one more strike with it to get Sasasha's sword away from her. With his strike, he was able to get the sword out of her hand into the ground a little ways away. As the strength in Naruto's sword faded and he watched the sword fall and lose its orange glow, he thought to himself that was too easy. He found out a few seconds later why it was so easy to get Sasasha's sword away from her. The new seals on Sasasha's gloves gave off a few orange sparks and caught fire. She had let go of her sword and now Naruto was overextended and wide open. Sasasha did a two-handed punch to Naruto's chest and said, "Flame burst." At that moment fire exploded on Naruto's chest and blasted him back into a tree in a cloud of smoke. Sasasha then formed a few hand seals and said, "Fire style, fireball jutsu," and a fireball about 3 meters wide launched at the smoke cloud that was Naruto. When the fireball was a few meters from Naruto, Sasasha heard, "Water style, water bullet." A ball of water came out of the smoke and turned the fireball to steam. Sasasha found something odd about Naruto's voice, it was higher pitch. A few moments later she found out why. As the steam cleared there was Naruto in all her glory. "Well, this is new," Sasasha said as the new curvy Naruto came into view. Naruto's shirt had now a new hole between her new B cups and there was even some damage to the chain mail under the shirt. Naruto smiled and said, "Yami and Hinata have been experimenting with this form and we found out that in this form I have a water affinity." Sasasha laughed a little and said, "I didn't know that Hinata was into this kind of thing." "Me neither, but you learn something new every day," Naruto said. With that said Naruto dashed at Sasasha. Sasasha was a bit surprised that Naruto was now faster and wasn't fighting like he usually did. Instead of using a loose form of the hard fight, Naruto was using the hubby style with his newfound flexibility. Sasasha, with her Sharingan on, saw that Naruto was pumping a lot of chakra through his body to be faster, stronger, and get better reflexes. Sasasha knew one other thing about Naruto, he could burn 5 times more chakra than her and she would still run out of chakra first. Naruto was having a great time with this spar in his female form. There were a few things that changed now that he was a she. 1. Now, his flexibility could give Hanabi a run for her money. 2. He had a bit better chakra control, not much but still. The last thing was that for some reason Naruto's elemental affinity changed from wind to water. As Fem Naruto, his control over water was a bit below that of his wind control when he was himself. There were a few drawbacks. He wasn't as strong in his female form and his wind control drops. All in all, it was a good change to make when he was fighting fire element people like Sasasha. Sasasha went back for her sword but Naruto cut her off with a seal Fuuinjutsu style Hodo 4, Byakurai. A beam of lightning tore across Sasasha's path making her stop for a moment, that was all Naruto needed. Naruto took out another seal and said, "Fuuinjutsu style Bakudo 4, Heinawa." Sasasha was already ready for the jutsu to hit, as she knew how Naruto's Bakudo worked. They worked by sealing the chakra pathway much like the Hyuga style of fighting, but were a bit less effective. While the Hyuga style completely blocks the chakra pathways, Naruto's Bakudo gunked them up along with some physical restraint. Sasha exited the chakra in her pathways to help stave off Naruto's Bakudo from affecting her too much. Hinata and Hanabi could get out of a binding like this in a moment, but it took Sasha a few seconds to get it off, and that's all Naruto needed. With one more seal Fuuinjutsu style Hodo 31, Shakuho, Sasha broke the bindings a moment too late and rocketed away, much like she had done to Naruto a minute earlier, by a foot-wide ball of red light. Sasha got up a few moments later a little worse for wear and rushed to grab her sword and, with a bit of a bloodthirsty grin, knew that today was going to be a good day. After her spar with Naruto that day, Sasha went home for a good bath to work out the kinks in her sore muscles. She saw her brother Sasuke sitting in their living room looking rather ominously and knew that was never a good thing. When she came in the room, her brother just looked at her with narrowed eyes. Sasha looked at her brother and asked, "What do you want, Sasuke?" "Why do you hang out with those weaklings?" Sasuke asked. Sasha raised an eyebrow and said, "Because they are my friends." Sasuke scowled at that and said, "Why are you making friends with them?" Sasha answered with a raised eyebrow, "You are asking me why I made friends with 4 clan heirs, 2 Jonin, a Genin, and a soon-to-be seal master. Is that what you are asking me, Sasuke?" Sasuke was a bit taken back by her statement but continued with his point, "Those people will only hold you back." "No, Sasuke, they will not hold me back. They are pushing me forward. They are the best in our class," Sasha said. "I'm the best of the class. I'm going to be Rookie of the Year when we graduate." Sasuke all but snarled at the thought of someone being stronger than him. Sasha narrowed her eyes at his tone and walked toward, "No, Sasuke, you aren't the strongest in our class. You aren't even the strongest in this house." This just pissed Sasuke off. He knew he was stronger than his sister and was going to prove it, and he went to attack her, but as soon as his punch touched her, she dissolved into a black dust. Sasuke was only confused for a moment as Sasha spoke into Sasuke's ear, "You couldn't even tell you were already in my genjutsu." Sasuke spun around to look at his sister and was shocked to see her with the Sharingan, and it was almost complete with 3 tomo in her right eye and 2 in the other. He lashed out again only for her to catch his arm this time. "You can achieve much greater results when you train with others and have them push you to your limits." Just to emphasize her point, she squeezed his wrist and brought the great last Uchiha to his knees. Sasha then took a look of pity and said, "Is this really all you're capable of?" That only made Sasuke angrier, and he threw a kunai at Sasha only for her to dissolve into dust too. "Apparently that is all you are capable of, Sasuke." Sasuke looked to Sasha to see that she hadn't even moved from the spot where she was standing at the beginning of their conversation. He had been under her genjutsu from the beginning of their conversation. Sasha just left a stunned Sasuke in her wake as she left the room. Sasuke just stood there and glared at the spot she had been standing. Sasha had not only got him in a genjutsu, but she had put him in one that had caused him real pain. Sasuke could still feel the grip and the phantom pain of Sasha's illusion trying to crush his wrist. It only pissed him off more that his sister had gotten stronger than him, the last Uchiha right under his nose, and he couldn't see it. He would train harder and longer so he could prove that he was the strongest and to one day avenge his clan. Itachi had once said that he wasn't worth killing. Did that mean that Sasha was worth killing early to make her not a threat? Did that mean Itachi saw Sasuke as never being able to match him? Sasuke didn't know, but the more he thought about it, the more it pissed him off. When Sasha got to her room and knew the moment she walked in someone else was there. She touched the security seals she had in her room and turned them to their max and said, "Come out." In one of the dark corners of her room, a figure in a long black cloak and a blank white mask came, and that was all the features that Sasha could make out. "Your report," the figure said in a monotone voice. Sasha looked at him for a moment and said, "There isn't much new to report. Naruto can now fight in his female form and it changes his elemental affinity to water. There are a few other changes, but that is the most important." There is still no way that Naruto will leave the village. He has too much to lose if he left, that hasn't changed. The figure just nodded and was about to leave when Sasha said one last thing. You may want to watch my brother a bit more, as I just showed him the difference in our strength a few moments ago and he was not happy about it. The figure seemed to consider this new information for a moment, nodded and left the room. Sasha sneered after the figure left and looked a bit like her brother at that moment. She hated that man with a passion that few could even fathom. She had to report about Naruto, Hinata, Hanabi, Yakumo, Tenten, the new member of their group Ino, and even Anko. She hated having to do this, but she had no other choice. She would kill that man someday, and finally have this weight off her shoulders. Tenten was getting in a little training of her own. Tenten had started to work with Anko a few weeks after meeting her and they had a sort of student-teacher relationship. Anko was no slouch when it came to weapons. In Anko's mind anything was a weapon. Be it a kunai or a dango stick, anything could be a weapon. Guy was a little weary of letting his student training with her, but it only took Anko a short chat with him to see that it may be a good idea to have his kunoichi train under another every once in a while. It only took Guy a few weeks to note that it was a good decision with some of the improvements that Tenten was making. Anko couldn't help Tenten much with her lightning affinity. Anko had a fire and earth affinity, but when it came to hand-to-hand combat she was one of the best kunoichi in the village for the job. So the days that Tenten trained with Anko, it was mostly sparring matches with her Arkusabaru. Tenten was getting more familiar with many of her weapons, mostly her bow staff, axe, and especially her sword. She was also getting used to her new ability to magnate her kunai and shuriken. She could keep track of about 10 to 15 in the air while she's fighting. Any more than that takes too much concentration to keep them in the air and use her weapons. That brought Tenten to where she is now. After a few weeks of training with Anko, Anko thought Tenten was ready to be introduced to her favorite training ground, 44, the Forest of Death. In the beginning Tenten hated this forest, but after a few weeks she figured out why Anko brought her here. It was the perfect place to get combat experience outside of the bandit clearing missions that her team went on. Tenten was now fighting a swarm of giant spiders, which had to be the size of your average dog. In the beginning it was harder for Tenten to kill the spiders. She had to use her axe, kanabo, or exploding kunai just to get through the spider's exoskeleton. Now though she could use her bow staff and sword to get through the spiders. Tenten was at the entrance of the spider's den, which was a grove of very dense trees with a tunnel web going from the ground to almost the canopy of the forest, covering an area of about a city block. She was currently smashing the spiders with her bow staff. One spider leapt at her from above, but Tenten saw it coming and with a poof of smoke she was now holding a sword and cut it in two. Another poof later and spin of her staff at the one that tried to take advantage of the distraction were knocked back into their tunnel web. Tenten leapt back in a poof of smoke. There was a half-dozen kunai in the air. Tenten waved her hand forward and the kunai took off at high speed and all hit the head of the spiders she had just knocked back. A moment later they all exploded, leaving half-dozen less spiders. After that Tenten got back to work with her sword. Where Anko was standing she could see that Tenten's skill with a sword had gone up quite a bit from when she had started to train Tenten. One of the reasons for that was that Tenten was facing an opponent that was trying to kill her. Maybe she should introduce Tenten to Hayate Gecko or Yugao Azuki. They were the best genjutsu users in the village. For now though she would just watch to see what she could have Tenten work on next. This wouldn't be the last time Tenten fought these spiders, but she had a plan today. One of the things Tenten had noted about the spiders is that their silk was extremely strong and it gave Tenten an idea. What if she made her clothes out of that silk? It could probably stop lighter attacks like kunai, shuriken, and some glancing blows from weapons. She had even seen the silk survive some of her weaker elemental attacks. Today she was going to catch a few of the spiders and put one of the new seals she had made on them. Tenten saw her chance to a few spiders. She only needed 4 or 5, and she took it. She cut one last spider in half and her sword poofed away, leaving a scroll in her hand. Tenten opened the scroll and threw it on the ground under a few spiders as she made the ram seal. The seal glowed for a moment and then a strong wind picked up. The scroll started to suck in anything above it. One of the spiders was smart enough to leap away, but the others were sucked into the scroll. Tenten counted 6, more than she expected, get sucked into the scroll. She quickly leapt to pick up the scroll before the spiders swarmed the area again and leapt to where Anko was. Anko looked at her and asked, "What's with the scroll?" Tenten smiled and answered, "I want to see it. I could make some clothes out of the silk of these spiders." Anko nodded. It had been done before and they were always high-quality clothes for ninja. The spiders don't take too kindly to someone taking their silk. Tenten nodded and said, "I figured as much, but I have a new seal that may help with that." "What kind of seal?" Anko asked, not liking that Tenten may be talking about a slave seal. Anko had something like that on her neck and didn't want a somewhat student of hers looking into seals like that. "It's an animal taming seal for unruly animals. I may have to modify it for these spiders, as they are quite a bit stronger than a dog, but I'm confident I can do it," Tenten said. That was a bit better than what Anko thought what she was thinking about, but still it was a slippery slope to be on, and she said, "Be careful with seals like those, you may cause more harm than good." Tenten was confused for a moment on what Anko could be talking about, but got it a few moments later and said a little frantically, "Oh no, I would never make a seal to make something against its will." Anko nodded and said, "Just be careful." Tenten nodded and Anko continued, "Now I believe it's time to end today's training and for you to treat me to some dango," finishing with a smile. Tenten only hung her head. Having Anko train her wasn't cheap, as Anko had a dango addiction that could rival Naruto's addiction to ramen. With that they left the forest to get back to the village and to Anko's favorite dango shop. Hinata was having a good last few months, and with graduation just a few weeks away she was looking forward to get to be on a team with her friends. The last few months have been busy for her as she was now almost Naruto's secretary and his girlfriend. As to why Hinata is now Naruto's secretary was the fact that she had found out a few months ago that Naruto was keeping all of his money underneath some lost floorboards in his room. That was an epic face-palm moment for Hinata. Naruto was keeping nearly 8 million yen under his floor from the seals that he sells to the shop that Tenten works at. Hinata had asked why all that money was under his floor and not in a bank or in a sealing scroll. Naruto had said that he had tried, but he always got kicked out of the bank before he could even get a word out, and as for the scroll, he hadn't thought of that. Hinata had to sigh at that. She should have probably seen that one coming. So Hinata did the one thing she could do for him, she opened an account. Hinata had to say it was an interesting day. She went to one of the best bank in the village with all of Naruto's money in a scroll. It wasn't too odd for children from clans to open an account, but that was usually after they became a ninja. Hinata went straight to one of the more high-end bankers and asked for a meeting. They granted her request, and after they saw the amount she was depositing they were more than happy to open an account, but they had a few questions as to how she got this money. She made up a story that her father wanted her to get experience dealing with money and they bought it. The work Naruto was doing at the steel fan weapon shop only covered about 8.5 million of that money, the rest was all from some custom jobs he had been asked to do. He was still receiving some payments from some of those jobs. Naruto had gotten 2 custom jobs from the Hokage. They were orders for Naruto's scroll and book security clamps, about 5 times what he was used to, but he got them all to the Hokage with a few days before the deadline with Tenten's help. The other order was some of Naruto's custom seals. The main 2 were the barrier seal and the invisibility seal that Anko had put in a report as to why there would be a few new beings in the village and a new recruit for their village, Kusaburo, Anko's new friend. Hinata had helped him negotiate that deal for all the research and for the full seal array for these seals. Naruto made about 2 million for those 2 seals and more for all the scroll and book security clamps. The other job that Naruto had done is what shocked Hinata the most. Naruto got a job from the Hyuga clan. Her father Hiashi Hyuga had found out about Hinata's bank account for Naruto when the bank had sent a bank statement to him on Hinata's account. They were just informing him on how his daughter was spending what they thought was his money. Flashback. Hiashi called Hinata into his office and was now sitting on the other side of his desk. Hinata was cool and collected for anything her father had for her. Hinata and Hanabi were about even in skill, with Hinata being faster and Hanabi having better form, so the elders of the clan were willing to let the choosing of the next clan to wait until a clear winner was found. Hinata just waited for her father to speak. Hiashi looked to his daughter and said, "I received a most interesting letter today for the bank saying that you have 11.5 million yen in the bank. My question to you is, how did you manage to get that much money?" Hinata's eyes widened a little at that, not expecting the letters to go to her father as she knew she set it up to go to Naruto's apartment. Instead of answering right away, Hinata asked, "Why did you get a letter on that account?" Hinata's father gave a very stern look but answered, "The letter came with the manager of the bank along with the account information." "Now answer my question." Hinata looked at her father for a moment before answering, "It's not my money, it's Naruto's." This threw Hiashi a bit for a loop and he asked the obvious question, how did he come by so much money? Naruto has been selling the seals that he makes to a local weapon shop, and has been even commissioned by the Hokage to make large quantities of seals along with selling some of his more advanced seals. Hinata said to her father. This surprised Hiashi even more. He had known that Naruto was practicing the art of Fuuinjutsu, but he had no idea that he was advanced enough to start making a profit from it. Even the Hokage acknowledged his skill by paying Naruto for seals. "How many seal is he selling?" Hiashi asked. Hinata thought for a moment and said, "He sells 2,000 paper seals and 400 book and scroll security clamps a month to the steel fan weapons shop. The demand for his seals is going up, so I wouldn't be surprised if those numbers go up. Naruto may sell the seal design of those that he sells now to the shop owner and start to sell the shop new seals. I have talked to Naruto about this, but he isn't sure if it is the right move for him to make. It's his decision to make, so I only give him my opinion." The Hokage wanted 2,000 of those book and scroll security clamps and the sale of 2 of his more advanced seals. Hiashi thought about this for a moment as he asked the next 2 questions he had. Why is the account in your name and what are these security clamps? Hinata spoke as she took a scroll out of her pocket. The bank wouldn't let Naruto in to make an account, so I made one for him, and me and Hanabi help Naruto if he ever has a problem or question about money. I've more or less become his account manager. The scroll that Hinata had just taken out had a steel ring around it, and Hiashi saw that there was sealing script pounded into the steel. This is a scroll security clamp. They can be set to unlock to blood, chakra, or password and have some durability seals on the metal so someone can't just break or cut them off. Naruto had improved them from the first ones that he made. Those could be thrown into a fire and be pulled out fine, but now they can withstand D and many C-class jutsu. Hiashi held out his hand for the scroll and Hinata handed it to him. He looked at the round seal that was pounded into the metal. He knew a bit of seals and knew that what he was seeing was not the whole seal. If he had to guess, he would say the rest of the seal was on the inside of the metal ring, maybe put there when the metal was still red hot. The malleable metal would then be formed around the seal that was on a rod of some kind. He turned on his Byakugan just to confirm his suspicions and saw that he was right. These are well made, Hiashi said, giving Naruto a small compliment, surprising his daughter again as she gave a nod. Hiashi thought for a few moments more and said, I want you to bring Naruto to me for a meeting. A surprised Hinata tried to think of all the reasons as to why her father would want to meet Naruto, and considering what they were talking about, she had a strong feeling she knew why. Fine, father, what should I say that this meeting is about? Tell him to bring his best seals pitch, Hiashi answered. Bottom of form, top of form. A few days later, Naruto walked into the Hyuga clan compound. It was a beautiful compound. It had white walls and a brown cosmetic-style roof with white lilies lining most of the outside of the compound. Naruto walked with Hinata into the largest building and sat in a room about the size of his entire apartment. Hinata told Naruto that he was going to be showing some of his seals to her father Hiashi and maybe selling some of them. So he got ready and pulled out a few scrolls and put them onto the coffee table that was in front of him. Naruto had a 2 feet wide scroll with a few seals written on it taking up most of the coffee table. After a few minutes of getting ready, Hiashi walked into the room and sat down across from Naruto. "Hello Hyuga-sama, Hinata told me that you were interested in some of my seals," Naruto said in a respectful tone. Sasha, Hinata, and Hanabi's hard work with Naruto was showing. "I have a few questions for you before we talk about that," Hiashi said, and at Naruto's nod continued, "What level of sealer are you, Naruto?" Naruto thought about that for a moment. He had been very busy with his work and training, and said, "I'm a mid to high journeyman class sealer." Hiashi nodded and thought about what that meant for a moment. It meant that Naruto could construct and deconstruct moderately difficult seals. Hiashi looked to the seal that was on his coffee table and read what he could of it. The center of the seal had the kanji for fire inside a trio of elongated diamond shapes overlapping in a row. On the outside of the diamonds there was more writing that Hiashi thought was to control how hot the fire was. The last set of seals was a ring that he knew was a barrier seal, and the whole seal was about 1.5 feet across. "I am a bit interested in the security seals that you can make. Tell me more about them," Hiashi said. Naruto just nodded and picked up one of the scrolls on the coffee table and said, "This is one of the first scroll security clamps I ever made." He then set the seal on the table and Hiashi saw the difference between the one his daughter had and the one on the table. This one only had the seal painted onto the metal and there was a lot more writing on the outside, while the one his daughter had a more compact seal and it was carved into the metal. Naruto turned on the small barrier seal on the table, then the fire seal on the scroll. The fire was a dark red and he said, "This seal will be fine in a fire this hot," but, as he said that, Naruto pumped more chakra into the seal and the fire went from dark red to red then to orange. At that point the seal and scroll began to blacken and burn. It can only withstand a heat of about 800 degrees Celsius. "My new ones are better than that though." Naruto then turned off the seal and took out the now burnt scroll and grabbed the other scroll that was more like the one that Hiashi had already seen and put that one on the seal in the middle of the seal on the table. "This one can take more punishment," and once again Naruto turned up the heat. Naruto went straight to orange this time, then to yellow, bright yellow, then finally to white. At white the scroll began to burn, but not much, just the edges began to burn and nothing more. "This seal can take about 1600 degrees of heat but not much more," Naruto said, turning off the seal and looking to Hiashi. "Is this about what you're looking for, Hyuga-sama?" Hiashi shook his head and said, "No, I need something that will protect our clan secrets for a long time, and some of the oldest scroll can't be put under any unnecessary stress, something that wouldn't even let someone touch the scrolls if they have no right to. Can you make something like that, Naruto-san?" Naruto did have something like that. It was what he used to protect the scrolls and books in his own apartment, but did Naruto want to give some of his best security seals over to another clan? But before that, one of the other things that Hiashi said caught, "I have a way to copy old scrolls into new ones." Hiashi raised an eyebrow at that and said, "Can you now?" "Hi," Naruto said while taking out another scroll. "It's a seal's jutsu that I use once in a while when one of my scrolls gets too worn out." After saying that, there was a poof of smoke and a foot-long scroll was in his hand. Naruto rolled up the scroll that was on the coffee table and he laid down another. The seal on this scroll consisted of 2 round seals as big as the scroll, connected by 2 lines of seals. Naruto then took out 2 normal 8-inch long scrolls and showed Hiashi that one was blank and the other was just a scroll with some of Naruto's notes in it. Naruto put the 2 scrolls in each circles in the seal, and put a small well of ink in the middle of the seal. He then went through a few hand seal and touched the seal on the paper. The seal glowed and the ink in the middle of the seal was pulled out of its well and flowed across the page, not leaving a mark on the seal. The ink was sucked into the ends of the blank scroll until there was no ink left. Naruto picked up both scrolls and handed them to Hiashi for him to look at. Hiashi saw that the scroll was copied perfectly. It even had an ink stain that the old scroll had that he suspected was from spilled ink, which meant that written notes could be transferred too. This is good, but I would still want those security seals, Hiashi said. Naruto sighed at that and said, there are a set of security seals that would do what you want, but they're some of the best seals I can make and I use them to protect my scrolls. I'm not really itching to let someone else have it. What kind of seals are we talking about? Hiashi asked. I have a barrier seal on all my shelves. The barrier seal has several functions other than the obvious defense. It can filter out light, make the shelf airtight, and make it so the barrier look like a plane of glass so no one can see what's in the shelves. There is no way to get to the books or scrolls unless you have this seal. Naruto said as he turned over his right hand and channeled chakra to it, and a keyhole-shaped seal appeared on his hand. Hiashi looked at the seal on Naruto's hand and said, that sounds like it would take a lot of power. Naruto closed his hand and nodded, it does, but I found a way around that. How? Hiashi asked. I have scrolls in my walls that absorb chakra that people naturally give off, Naruto said. Hiashi knew that, but he also knew something else. Would that work here? Hyuga pride themselves on their chakra control and we don't give off as much chakra as normal ninja. Naruto thought for a moment and asked, how many people live in the compound? About 400, Hiashi answered. That should be enough for about 10 to 12 good-sized shelves and a few desks even if they are Hyuga, and in a pinch you can just pump chakra into scrolls, Naruto said. Desks? Hiashi asked. Some barrier seals to lock the drawer and make, if so only people with the seal can take stuff of your desk and so the paperwork will be protected from fire or even spilled drink or ink, Naruto answered. Hiashi nodded. That was just what he was looking for. How much would that cost? Naruto sighed and rubbed the back of his head as he thought, it's going to be quite a bit. Do you have a map of your compound? I need to know how many chakra scrolls one will need to make. It took about another hour to come to the number of 750,000 yen per shelf, 500,000 per desk, 100,000 per chakra scroll, and the sealing work to tie it all together. With 10 shelves, 4 desks, and 25 chakra scrolls, the total came to 12 million yen for the whole job. Naruto's going to be busy for the next few weeks. Bottom of form. Flashback end. Top of form. Naruto had a little over 21 million yen in his account after doing that job for the Hyuga clan, and now the other clans were looking at him with interest. He may have a lot of jobs in the near future and not enough of him to go around. Maybe he could learn some clone jutsu to help him. The wind clones that Naruto can make weren't the greatest thinkers. Maybe there was another clone jutsu that could work. Naruto had a plan for all the money he now had. He was going to buy his apartment building. The apartment building wasn't a big one, it was 4 stories tall. It had 8 one-bedroom apartments on the top 2 floors, 6 two-bedrooms on the second floor, and 4 three-bedrooms on the ground floor. One of the ground floor rooms belonged to the old bat that owned the building. So here Hinata was walking to the Hokage tower next to Naruto to help him convince the Hokage to let him buy his apartment building. They walked up to his office and asked the nice young secretary if they could see the Hokage. She said yes and they went in. They saw the Hokage behind his usual mountain of paperwork. He was taking a break as he knew Naruto and Hinata were on their way. Naruto, Hinata, how may I help you today? Sarutobi asked. Naruto and Hinata took a seat and Naruto said, I would like to buy my apartment building. Sarutobi was a little surprised at the sudden statement and thought about this for a moment and asked, do you have the money for that? After Naruto gets all the money from my clan for the job that he did, he should have 21 million yen, and some of the other clans have been over to my home to see if Naruto is as good as he says he is. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of the other clans asked Naruto to get some work done. Hinata answered. The Hokage had to nod at that. The seals that Naruto had put into the Hyuga clan were some of his most advanced, and Sarutobi was thinking of having Naruto put some of them in his clan compound and into his office, even if the seals would protect his paperwork, not destroy it. Have you asked what she would sell it for? Not yet. Hinata thought it may look better if the Hokage asked and not two 15-year-olds. Naruto said. The Hokage had to nod at that and asked, "Can you handle the responsibility of owning that apartment? We were going to make it a good price for fresh genin as it's close to the training fields. A few of my friends already said that they would move in when I buy my apartment building," Naruto said. Sarutobi hummed at that and said, "Putting business with friends doesn't always work." Hinata answered at that, "We figured if they could handle the responsibilities of a ninja, they can handle the responsibility of rent." That is a good point, Sarutobi thought to himself. They had already made a few good points, so he knew that Hinata and Naruto had at least thought about this decision. Sarutobi, Naruto, and Hinata talked for about another half hour, and at the end of their little business meeting, Sarutobi agreed with Naruto and Hinata. He would make the pitch to the owner of the apartment building. Naruto was having a great week. The deal for his apartment went through and was cheaper than he thought it would be. He used the rest of the money he thought was going into buying the apartment for a bit of remodeling. Seeing as there few other tenants in the building, some of the other apartments had fallen to disrepair. With the remodeling, electrical, and plumbing inspection, Naruto didn't want any surprises when more tenants started coming. Tenten, Shisasha, and even Anko were some of his first new tenants. It was a good start. Not only that, but it was the last week of school at the academy and Naruto was looking forward to starting his life as a ninja. That's why for once Naruto isn't reading a ceiling book in class. Alright, class graduation is just a week away, so let's make sure everyone has the basic 3 down, Iruka said. Of course everyone but Naruto could do the basic 3, Bunshin no Jutsu, Henge no Jutsu, and the Kawarimi no Jutsu. No matter what Naruto did, he couldn't pull a small enough amount of chakra to make the jutsu work for that match. Naruto doesn't even do the Henge no Jutsu right. For Naruto, it isn't an illusion, he really transforms, not that anyone notices. It got to Naruto's turn. He did Henge no Jutsu and the Kawarimi no Jutsu, but before he did, the clone said, "Iruka, you know I can't do the Bunshin no Jutsu." "I'm sorry Naruto, but you have to perform the jutsu to pass," Iruka said. "Then how did Rock Lee pass?" Naruto asked. Iruka was a little surprised by the question but answered, "Rock Lee was only able to pass because he was Chunin level in taijutsu and had a recommendation from a Jonin. So all I need is to have a skill at Chunin level and a recommendation from a Jonin." Naruto asked. Iruka nodded and Naruto continued, "Great, I can do that. The Kurama clan owes me a favor, they got some Jonin right." "I don't know about that Naruto," Shisasha said. "The Kurama clan is a bit of a dying clan there, putting most of their future on Yakumo, bringing them back to their former strength." Naruto frowned at that. "How about the Hyuga clan? I just did a huge job for them." "Our father would want something in return," Hanabi said, "or you could go with Anko." Naruto didn't like that he would have to give the Hyuga clan something after all the work he just did for them. Even if they did pay him, Anko could work, but she's still a special Jonin, even if she is stronger than any 2 average Jonin. Iruka interrupted them. "That's not all you need Naruto, you also need a skill at Chunin level." "I don't need to worry about that," Naruto said. Iruka looked confused. "What do you mean?"